So, welcome everybody to In Conversation with Ian and Kev. I have with me two people from both industry and academia, and we're going to be taking through the journey of how they became to work where they are currently working at. Before we start, though, I would like to say that there is a chat function that's available on this webinar series, and I would say that if you could try and type in some of your questions that you may have for both Ian and Kev, and I will do my very best to forward them on for you. So, first of all, let's have ourselves some introductions. So, my name, first of all, Lauren Webster, and I work for the Wellcome Centre of Anti-Infectives, where my two lovely guests also work. And yes, I did beat them into submission for tonight. However, let's start, first of all, with Ian. So, Ian, if you'd like to just introduce yourself to the audience.
Hi, Lauren. Thank you for the introduction. I'm Ian Gilbert. I'm a chemist by training, so I did a degree and PhD in chemistry, and I'm really a medicinal chemist. And I came to Dundee at about 2005, and I came to sort of help start the drug discovery unit, and I have a real interest in developing drugs for infectious diseases. So as you can tell from my accent, I'm not from this part of the world. I come from around the London area, and I very much enjoyed being in Scotland.
Great, thank you very much. So as I say, let's introduce yourself to Kev, or Kevin Reid, sorry. So Kev, let's have a wee introduction from yourself. Oh, Kev, you are also muted.
That's a good start. Technical problems for me, great. Good evening, everybody. Yes, I'm Kevin Reid. So I head up a function we call Drug Metabolism and Pharmacokinetics in the Drug Discovery Unit in the Wellcome Centre of Anti-Infectives Research. And if you're all wondering what DMPK stands for, then well, that's what we actually do, is just to understand how the drug behaves in the body. So what we're very interested in is whether your drug will get to where it needs to have the desired effect without having any unwanted effects, and obviously stays there long enough to have that desired effect. And this is what we're all about, and I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about that later. So I joined the Drug Discovery Unit in 2008, moving from GlaxoSmithKline in Verona in Italy. So a very cold transition to Dundee, particularly as it was the second week of January when I moved. So I've been here 12 years now. So. Good evening.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Kevin. It's lovely to see that you've picked up the Scottish accent after being here for so long. Beautiful. So what we're going to do now is we're going to start taking the audience through both Kev and Ian's journey through how they became to come where they actually are. So let's take a look at, first of all, your early career. So this is, you've both said that you have studied down in England. So let's think about what your first job was. So Ian, do you want to take us off with where you first saw yourself after you graduated from your PhD?
Okay, well, after I finished my PhD, I decided that I'd go and lecture chemistry in Africa. So I met lots of Africans while I was doing my PhD student, and I decided that I'd like to go and lecture chemistry. So I wrote to a number of English-speaking universities in Africa, and got a job at the University of Zambia, which is in Lusaka. So I went out about 6 months after I finished my PhD, and I started to my sort of main role was teaching organic chemistry to the third year undergraduates. So that meant me writing a lecture course, delivering tutorials, workshops, lab course, did a bit of work teaching to fourth years and master's students. One of the most daunting things I did actually was teaching biochemistry to a very large group of second years, and that was the first time I was put in front of about 300 people to teach.
Nice. And well, you said as well that your degree is in chemistry, and you yourself as a medicinal chemist, so a chemist utilizing their skills for medicinal purposes. Yeah. So what was it like actually teaching biochemistry, something that is out with your field, but not only that, but you're being judged by about 300 people.
It's quite nerve-wracking, standing in front of 300 people, but it wasn't fortunately at a very high level. So and there's a lot of similarities between chemistry and biology, but yeah, it was all right. It was just standing in front of 300 people was the most nerve-wracking bit, actually.
Oh, that's cool. And so from your experience working at the university, so from moving straight from your PhD, a newly graduate, bright-eyed, going off someplace else, how daunting was it to not only just leave your institute, but leave your country as well, to go off and do something totally different? Because as a PhD, you're research based, but you've gone off to go and do a lectureship.
I suppose I was a bit nervous going out, but as I said, I'd known a number of Africans when I was doing my PhD, and in particular, I actually knew a couple of Africans very well who'd come from Zambia, so they'd sort of given me quite a big insight into what it was like. Obviously, it was a big change from doing a PhD. But I was fortunate. I lived in a sort of hostel or hall of residence, if you like, for young lecturers that was just on the edge of the campus. And so I got to know a lot of young lecturers very quickly. And the Zambians were amazingly hospitable and friendly. And I got to know a lot of people very quickly. And very kind, and if you went round to visit somebody, you inevitably get invited for a meal as well. So it was very quick to get settled in. I think it took a little bit of time to get used to the heat. So going from the UK to somewhere where for the first 8 months it never really dropped much below 30 degrees C, and wearing a coat or a jumper is something I didn't do for a long time.
I bet not as well, especially as well. I believe you were out there for not just like a small stint, you were there for about a couple of years, is that right?
Just over a year.
Just over a year.
Yeah.
Great. So I was going to say, that's a little touch for the audience on what it's like from just an academic setting. But let's take a little wee look at some of the industrial settings. So we in our trade call it pharma. So this is where now we're going to direct some questions over to Kev. Kev's ready. He's unmuted. I can see that. Good for you, Kev. You might notice as well, Kev does not have a PhD in anything IT, but that's fine. So, Kev, I was going to say, so when you graduated, you didn't go as far afield as Ian, did you? Where did you end up after you graduated with your PhD?
Yeah, so I didn't really know quite what I wanted to do until the third year of my undergraduate. And then in those days, back in the mid-1980s, there was lots of opportunity for all the students to get an industrial placement year. So I went to Glaxo Group Research at Ware in 1987 for a year, and that really piqued my interest in terms of wanting to then work with industry, because I absolutely loved the idea of working with a group of scientists from all different disciplines all coming together to try and solve a single problem. That was my first exposure to sort of drug development, I would say, in those days, because we really didn't do much drug discovery then. It was more the development side of things. So that really piqued my interest. So then when I went back, finished my degree, I then went and I had an opportunity to go back to Glaxo as soon as I finished, actually, but that was at their Greenford site in London at the time. But I was also offered an opportunity to go to a contract research house called Huntingdon Life Sciences in Huntingdon, just south of Peterborough. So I thought, well, actually, I'll try something different. So I went there, but actually, if I'm being honest, it was probably a mistake. I didn't really like the contract research organizational side of things. I got frustrated that, we were told what we had to do in terms of the science, even when we knew what the outcome was likely to be, and that actually sometimes it could be a real waste of time. We had no real control in those days into how the studies could be performed. It was just a matter of just dealing with client needs. So within 2 years, so that was 1989 to 91, and then after those 2 years, there was another opportunity to go back to Glaxo, but back at the Ware site where I was for my industrial placement. So I moved back there in January 1992, and then went through many rounds of changes there at Ware until the second big merger that I went through. So the first was with Wellcome in 95, 96, and then SmithKline Beecham merger in 2001, and then had an opportunity then to move to Glaxo Italy, where I stayed for 7 years until moving to Dundee.
Cool. So let's take a little step back. So when you moved out of your degree and you got to go have a chance to go work at Glaxo, what was it like? Like, as in the differences between what you were exposed to as the student and what you got as an opportunity as working pharma. Now, you can be brutally honest, you know, you don't have to say you did it for the money, but we all know that's probably the case.
Absolutely, and
He didn't lie, everyone.
it was the money in those days. I mean, to be paid for your industrial, I think it was about £5,500 at that time. That was a fortune, because my rent was only £18 a week, so it was unbelievable in those days. But no, I mean, if I'm being serious, I mean, it was just the exposure to the big corporate environment. I mean, a huge organisation that had a big social club, a great social network outside of the working environment, but then state-of-the-art facilities and all these new pieces of kit that I never had any exposure to at all whilst in the university setting at that point. So it was a wonderful experience.
Cool. So for both of you, so this is both to Ian and Kev, but we'll start off with Ian on this one. Sorry, Kev, I'm just giving you a wee moment. So when you moved into your new setting, so Ian, we're talking about when you were in Zambia, and Kev, we're talking about when you were off having a great time at GSK. What did you appreciate the most? As in, what did you discover that was new to you and you thought, this is absolutely amazing? And I'm talking about something that enables your research rather than your social activity. So Ian first on that one, and then we'll move over to Kev on that.
Yeah, that's a difficult question, Lauren. I mean, I think I went from research really to doing a lot of teaching. I was teaching full time, and I think the time that I was there, I didn't have the opportunity to really establish much research. And I think logistically it would have been hard to establish something. I think I think what I took in terms of bringing things back was the enthusiasm with the students that I worked with and taught. I mean, I think the students were incredibly hard working and very dedicated to their studies, and I think that was really impressive about how much work they put into learning chemistry. And I think it was I really enjoyed trying to sort of convey what Kevin might not appreciate is the beauty of chemistry to the students there. Get across things like reaction mechanisms, and for the chemists, but curly arrows are very important in chemistry in terms of trying to understand how reactions work, and stereochemistry. So I think those were things that I really learned a lot about. And in terms of when I moved to Zambia, it was one of the things I did come into contact with, which had a very big influence on me when I came back, was the infectious diseases that I saw there. So when I arrived, it was the AIDS epidemic was really sort of taking hold of Africa or Zambia, and it was having a huge impact. And malaria was a really big problem. So even though I was living in the middle of a city, malaria was a big problem, and lots of people I knew got malaria, and very sadly, just after I came back to the UK, one of my neighbours died from malaria. And I think that sort of gave me the realization that there was a big need for new drugs to treat people to treat these infectious diseases, and that was sort of, I guess, quite a big factor in influencing the research that I subsequently did. So when I came back, after a couple of years, I managed to get a position at Cardiff University and established a group that looked at did research, drug discovery for neglected diseases.
Great, no, that's good. So, Ian, just staying with Ian just for a moment, what would you then say? So, what was a one moment highlight for you whilst you were teaching? If you can think, I know it was a wee while ago, but if you can think,
a wee while
just
ago, yes.
I know.
A long time ago. I think I got a real thrill out of seeing this. The students learn and appreciate chemistry, and really to be able to develop in their understanding of chemistry. So I think it's seeing what really gave me a thrill there was be able to help those people to learn and to progress. And similar in the UK as well. It's really good when people that you're working really teaching actually get it and progress to the next level.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I would back that up as well. There's nothing more rewarding to an educator than seeing your student or trainee or whoever it is that you're mentoring get that light bulb moment and they actually get it. And it's very rewarding as an educator. So I would also back you up on that one.
Yeah.
So Kev, so now going over to Kev. So we're still in your GSK days. I know they were a long GSK days, but still there nonetheless. What would you say that you like? So the same question is for you about the access to something that helped progress your work, or the difference that you were able to progress your projects faster with this thing that was only available to you at Pharma.
Yeah. I mean, it's. Certainly, all my training was in pharmacology, and really being taught drug discovery didn't exist in those days. So it was an on-the-job training, and learning about the need for all the other different disciplines, and these strange creatures called medicinal chemists that I'd never heard of before, and as well, and the fact that we needed to work very closely with them to make sure that they did the right things so that we actually ended up with the right molecules. But no, I think if it goes back to the very beginning of my career and back to the actual point of your question, I think it was getting our first HPLC.
Excellent.
Believe it or not, in 1987. Glaxo Group Research Aware didn't have one. This was our first one coming in, and it was this was new technology to us back then, and actually to then move on to actually being able to measure or quantitate our drugs in various tissues using LC rather than having to radiolabel it first and to go through the old pain of TLC plates non-stop all the time for this was a great move for us, and then mass spec was already there, but this was a sort of darkened room with a machine that took up the size of the room actually, and none of the junior scientists were allowed anywhere near this thing. And if I look over my career over the last 30 years, the advancements in the technologies that we need as our bread and butter to do our job properly now has been absolutely phenomenal, to these sort of benchtop machines from the early days where we started, when I was even having to pack my own columns initially, and this sort of work as well. So it's been a huge transition over time. I can't really pinpoint one particular thing that's helped, but obviously, the transition to having more readily accessible LC and then LC-MS, particularly for our discipline, to be able to measure where the drugs are in what compartments of the body, that's been critical in that development, and we take it for granted now.
So Kev, you mentioned HPLC. So for our audience, would you be able, you've said, it's a fantastic instrument, and they're thinking it's like something off, what was it, the Imitation Game. It's this massive, bulky, clunky thing that's sitting in a room that nobody wants to ever access to. So could you maybe just enlighten us just what exactly the HPLC stands for, but did to influence your work?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, so sorry. This is another thing as well. Actually, the use of acronyms is horrendous with industrial people, and I soon realised that when coming into an academic environment, I have to describe all the various acronyms. No, HPLC. That stands for High Performance Liquid chromatography. So in a nutshell, it just allows us to actually retain and using a particular method measure our compound of interest by UV or mass spectrometry.
Cool. That's great. So we're now going to take the rest of the journey. So we've started off with your early life, what both of you did. I'm not going to ask you if you can speak the languages of the countries that you went to. I mean, I'm probably going to forgive Ian more than Kev, because you know, Italian, it's not that far off of anything else. But you know, I'll forgive both of you. I will not shame you both in that one. So we're now progressing on to, so Ian is still with academia, and Kev is making the transition that maybe the pharma people might refer to as the dark side, coming back to academia, but as academics, we probably refer to the pharma side as being the dark side. So whatever, Kev is making this transition. So when you both came now to work at the University of Dundee, so you have to be honest with this one, and you're not sitting next to each other, so you can't hit each other on it either. What did you think of each other when you first met? And I'm actually, Ian, I'm going to give you a pass on this one, and we're actually going to let Kev answer this first. So that means that you can do whatever necessary to him after this webinar.
I was used to working with medicinal chemists that had bow ties and dressed very strangely, so Ian seemed quite normal in comparison. In comparison to the ones that I'd been used to at Glaxo, but no, I mean, in all seriousness, I mean, you know, I think merging academia, I mean, academics and pharma people don't speak the same language, and it's important that you marry the two together. And I think that was the great thing or certainly the thing that helped draw me towards this, helping set up the drug discovery unit, because you know the power of the basic fundamental biology and other components that you've got in academia, and then putting it with the industry sort of drive and know how to move that forward or keep it applicable in terms of the applied setting. I think you know that's a marriage that really truly works, and I think you know over the years that the DDU's been functional, we've demonstrated that to date with the compounds that are excitingly going forward in the clinic. But yes, Ian, no, I think it's quite normal for a medicinal chemist.
Ian, get your bow tie out.
Yeah.
So the same question for you, Ian.
Yes, well, sadly, I don't have a bow tie, so I can't get them out. But no, I think one of the things that really attracted me to want to come to Dundee was the opportunity to bring together, if you like, the academic side of things and the industrial side. I think, as Kev said, actually both have real strengths. Sometimes there's a breakdown in language between the two in communication, but I think in the Wellcome Centre in WCare, we've worked very hard to bring the academic side together, where we're trying to understand the fundamental biology with the sort of industrial side, and there's, as Kev said, there's really great strengths in bringing them together, and actually each on their own benefit. Putting them together sort of mutually benefits each other. So I think we're really lucky in the Wellcome Centre. So we've got great world-class biologists who really understand the basic biology of the parasites that we're working with and the organisms, and can develop tools that and explain the parasites to us in the drug discovery unit. And in the drug discovery unit, we have people who understand what you need to do to take a project through the drug discovery process, which can be very complicated. And having people like Kev's and his team with their ability to understand how compounds are likely to behave in the body that's really critical. Without that, you can't do drug discovery well. And that was one of the things that attracted me to come to Dundee, was being able to pull together all these people from different disciplines and different groups.
Right. That's actually really interesting as well, that both sides, like the industry and the academia, have managed to merge themselves together into something quite harmonious. Actually, it's very nice to hear. So now what we're going to do is we're just going to take a slight break from your guys' life, especially in the drug discovery unit. And in actual fact, we've got some questions from the audience. So one of them, somebody has asked and said that they're currently actually studying at Dundee University for the life sciences. And they're asking about, are there lots of career opportunities in the way of drug discovery in Dundee, or even just the surrounding areas as well? So it's this is for both of you, actually. I was going to say, whatever one wants to jump there first. If anybody looks like they're going to jump in.
Yeah, I can certainly answer that. I mean, there's certainly opportunity here for sure. I mean, actually, when I came here, we set up some modules to actually teach drug discovery to the undergraduates that in year 3 and year 4. And actually, it's been great. In some of those undergraduates, we have, once they've graduated, we have actually employed in the drug discovery unit as junior scientists, and it's wonderful to watch them, develop and grow in their careers over the years from when we were actually teaching them. So yes, there is opportunity. I think Dundee would help if there was more of similar. Organisations in Dundee, because I think if you have these hubs of places in one area, it helps with the overall growth, and it's quite healthy to be able to move around a little bit as well, because that keeps the competition going as well. And there is concept across the road, and Dundee's obviously very active to try and spin out organisations, and there's been some very successful recent spin outs with Amphista and such like as well. So there is opportunity in the area with more broadly than just the drug discovery units at Dundee. And then of course, in Scotland there's BioScent and other organisations over towards Glasgow. But being somebody that's that spent some time as well in Europe, I would encourage a sort of more broader movement around rather than just in Dundee as well. Potentially, there's a lot of opportunities in different organisations, and there's a lot of biotechs and startups around. The model's very, very different to the way it was when I started my career, where there was a lot of major pharma through mergers and downsizing. There's been a lot of new CRO activity. The contract research organisations are growing in number and taking a very large percentage of the overall sort of pharma market now in terms of what they do. And there's many organizations there, and they're not just service-based models anymore. They're fully integrated drug discovery units as well. So although there's not so many of the major, what we call big pharma groups, there's lots of opportunity across a broad range of small, medium biotechs, CROs, startup spin-outs, and these academic drug discovery centres like our own.
Yeah. So I have just maybe 2 questions also to add to that as well. So Kev, you had mentioned that when you were studying, doing your degree, that you were able to go out for an industry year. And I do know that some degrees, one in Dundee, will allow you to take out that extra year in industry. But a lot of people, because of the coronavirus pandemic this year, or even just placements, for instance, like final year projects and summer placements, for instance, these don't seem to be on offer to the students. And it's like, do you have any advice for these people who, this to both of you again, but do you have any advice to them, these people who just can't get this critical lab-based experience?
Yeah, I guess that's a difficult question to answer. I mean, I think certainly the undergraduates in Dundee that we've seen that have been away for a year in industry, often the people really benefit from that time in industry, and assuming of course they've had a good experience, come back with a lot more skills. I think, you know, it is hard. I mean, obviously, especially at the moment, it's almost impossible, I would guess, to find placements because of all the COVID restrictions. But you know, but it's hard, I guess, because there's lots of people from universities trying to get placements. But I mean, certainly if there are opportunities, you know, to take them, and I think within Dundee, for example, there's studentships for summer placements, and you know, I know Kev's group has had some, and we've had some in chemistry, and I think those, you know, hopefully those people will have really benefited from experience in a laboratory.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was gonna say, like, I'm with you all the way, that saying, you know, the experience in the lab is obviously very critical, and what you can learn from. I mean, I know that you said, you know, industry, like, you know, you go off to industry, but even sometimes, for instance, some of our students that we've gotten into the lab, they've actually come from academic, and the Wellcome Centre, the Drug Discovery Unit, we are still academic. So you've moved from one academic institution to another. So it's maybe just another opportunity for some of the students, that it doesn't have to just be industry to look out for.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with you. I think actually just having that experience in the laboratory is really powerful, whether it's in, you know, a company or in a university lab, in seeing how research is done and the thought processes. I think it's really important, even, you know, for even if it's only for a few weeks, and getting to see how people work.
Okay, that's good. That's good. Kev, so this one's mainly for you. On this one, this is talking about the transition from academia to industry and pharma. And are there things that you would like to have known before in order to make your transition better? Is there any advice that you could give these people who are very early on in their careers?
So the transition, what, from industry to academia?
From academia to industry. So people leaving their degree and moving into the pharma sector. Apartment rent doesn't cost £18 a month. That's a sad one.
No, I mean, it can be quite daunting at first, because, you know, you're going into a big environment with a lot of disciplines all working together. But, you know, you're well supported when you move into industry, you know, with a clear development path and a lot of training applied to you as required to make you feel comfortable in what you're doing, from all aspects of, you know, what I say, more pastoral things, in terms of the, you know, being able to communicate well in a team, working as a part of a teamwork, things that, you know, you may not have had a great deal of experience in before whilst you were carrying out your studies before you go into industry. So, you know, I certainly felt very well supported when I took my first steps into industry from academia, and you know, to me it was a very smooth transition. You know, I was pleased that I had the opportunity for the industrial year, because, as you know, as Ian says as well, it's key to try and get some lab experience beforehand, you know, if you can. And, you know, I very much appreciate how sad that's been for a lot of people not to have been able to get it over the last year or so with COVID. But you know, that said, you know, the opportunities will be there. You'll be well trained, well supervised. You'll be given a mentor. So, you know, it's not frightening, and it'll be fine.
Yeah, I think that, you know, when you go anywhere new, this is regardless of job and experience, it's always very daunting. And it's nice to hear as well that even with like a large powerhouse of industry, that they are still treating you kindly, as well, as though, I'm not saying that they're all bad, so that's not what I'm saying. I'm just meaning that they are taking the time to understand your level of experience, and they're tailoring the work in order to support you, to develop you into the scientist that you will later on become. So another question as well is that it's actually a really interesting question. Is that I've got a question here saying this person is from academia, and they hear an awful lot of people saying about or talking about that experience that it all started in industry and then they moved to academia. So perhaps this is not so much a question for Kev because that's what he did, but is it common to switch into industry after you have done a postdoc? So is it something common that's done?
I think, yeah, I mean, I think it's quite common for people to move from an academic setting to an industrial setting. I think what hasn't been so common in the past is people coming the other way from an industrial setting into an academic setting, but I think that's becoming more common, and actually I think it's really important that we get the mixtures between the two sectors, because I think, as we said earlier on, there's a lot of learnings that between the two different sectors. So I think we've really benefited in the drug discovery unit from a lot of people coming from an industrial background who've had industrial experience, and I think people who've got a lot of skills in academia also have something to offer to industry as well.
Yeah. Can I add something there as well? I mean,
of course you can.
Yeah, because I think I think we need to, if we're talking about drug discovery and development, we need to look at this as a single entity now. The new I like the term neurodiversity. That's me is what's key to innovation, having moved between the two sectors. You've got a great skill set in academia, you've got a very different, more applied skill set in industry. And actually, I've mentioned also around contract research organizations, they used to just be service providers, they're now integrated units. So actually, the organizations now where we're bringing academia, pharma, CROs all together, they're the business models that are actually making the most out of successfully driving forward new medicines for a whole range of therapeutic areas now, because you've got all of that neurodiversity. And you see this with all these other organizations, Lego and all these guys, they're bringing in all sorts of people left field to try and come up with the ideas. And we should absolutely encourage that in our industry as well, because of the different ways of thinking. But coming together, that's how you crack problems. And my word, there's hundreds of different challenges all the time, very different challenges depending on which diseases you're working in, to get a drug towards that clinic and that new treatment for that much needed disease. So to me, it's all about neurodiversity. So merge everybody together as best we can. The model that we've got here is working well in that regard.
That's really interesting that you say about merging disciplines, expertise and skill, because actually this goes to the next question as well. And somebody's asking, I'm midway through my PhD in immunology, but find DMPK really interesting and would be interested to possibly work in this area in the future. Do you think it's possible that I can transfer my skills to this post PhD? And if so, do you have any advice for doing so?
Supposed to, I mean, I think a lot of even medicinal chemists can make DMPK. So actually, they make very good ones because they understand the chemistry first, and that was my problem. I wasn't very good at the chemistry, and I understood the pharmacology. But so then you need the two merge together. But no, I think if you're young, it's never too late to change direction. You'll have learned a lot of core laboratory-based skills in whatever discipline that you're working in, and as long as you get the right mentorship and training, there's opportunity to change. And actually, some of the thought processes and things that you've learned in your own particular field may be very highly applicable, or more applicable than you think so, when you move into a different discipline. Actually, we're very keen at the moment with engineers and physicists working with us because of the way that bioimaging and that is going, and actually that could add a lot of added value to us. But I never really understood physics at school, so working with a physicist frightens me. But actually, it's a great way to get us to move forward in some of these areas now. So no, I don't think there's ever a time to say no, I couldn't retrain in another area.
And actually, I think, yeah, I agree. It also gives you, if you bring, say, immunology is so relevant to many areas of drug discovery. So if you're somebody who understands immunology and understands and can do DMPK, I think you would have a huge input into a drug discovery process.
Yeah, so both of you, like when you were doing your PhD at university, I mean, I imagine it's very different from what you do now, as in technique and skill that you've learned over the years. So another question is from the audience, is from your experience, both industry and academia, how do you find the relationship between these two groups when it comes to teamwork in order to achieve a common goal? So you have many successes in like your leishmaniasis projects and your malaria projects as well, and some other more recent advancing neglected diseases. So what do you say about that one?
Oh, I think as Kev said earlier, I think there is sometimes a sort of language component, and I always used to think that I didn't have much jargon, and then I talk to other people and then they think I speak a lot of jargon, and I think there is a definite language issue, but I think actually the teamwork that we have is within I think one of the strengths with WCare is it brings together people from a huge range of backgrounds, and I think we're getting much better at communicating with each other and teamwork. I mean, for example, Kev and I were in a meeting earlier on today where there were chemists, computational chemists, DMPK scientists, and looking at a problem together. And I think that challenge, is the challenge of drug discovery is very high, but actually having everybody together and looking at it from slightly different angles is really powerful. Sorry, does that answer the question? I've really forgot the question by the time I've got here.
No, you're right. You said that the Wellcome Centre strives on their teamwork to achieve their goal, and you integrate yourselves well within a multidisciplinary team. So yeah, I would say that 100% you answered the question.
You can't work together. You can't work in drug discovery and development without being a team.
Yeah.
So we're all friends, aren't we, Kev?
If you think of the range of disciplines that are needed, it's good teamwork is paramount.
Yeah.
To any success. So.
Well, I think also within the Wellcome Centre, there's not only the drug discovery capabilities. I mean, it's having the input from some of the fundamental biologists. I think another great strength we have is the mode of action group, which tries to understand on a sort of biological level how compounds work, and that's been really powerful to have that as part of the team, and that's really changing the way we're doing drug discovery and thinking about drug discovery. So it's by bringing all those people together, and particularly with the breadth that's in the Wellcome Centre, which really allows us to tackle new things, and to look at new ways of tackling things.
Yeah, no, that's great. It's great how from both of your different backgrounds, from academia, from pharma, large pharma, it wasn't just a biotech, GSK or GlaxoSmithKline, they're a large pharma company as well, that it's good how that you've managed to utilize the skills of people and you've put them all to good use, as in, to help this drug development, especially with these neglected diseases. So I have one remaining question, just while we've just got about a minute left. There's somebody who's a master's student from Brazil, and they're asking that, I'm thinking about being a PhD student soon. Do students from other countries have the same opportunities at pharmaceutical industry?
Sorry, what was the question again? Sorry.
So what it's asking is that do other students from other countries, do they have the same opportunity as in to move into the pharmaceutical industry if they're coming from another country, if they're coming from a poorer country than the developed world. So for instance, this student has said that they've come from Brazil, but do they still have the same opportunity to apply for those places and get in?
I think in some of the work we've done, we've met people who have got from a whole range of countries who have got PhDs and then moved and worked in other countries. So I think I can't really speak for how the industry does its recruitment, but I think I'm assuming they're looking for the best people that can fulfill the jobs that they have.
Yeah, they'll be searching for the best talent around the world, depending on who they're recruiting for. So I mean, it's a very multinational.
Yeah, I agree on that too. That it's not just bias into where you come from. It's about your level of technique and ability, often on interview. So somebody will read your CV as to where you came from, but the opportunities, look out for them on job centres, look out for even on their home websites, like the pharma's websites. I think that it shouldn't matter where you come from. It's about what experience and knowledge or just developing on your knowledge brings to that team.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I mean, we within the Wellcome Centre, we have people from a huge range of different countries working. And I think that actually enriches us because we get lots of different points of view again within the unit.
Mm-hmm. So the question that maybe much of the audience are wanting to know is, we have experience from industry and academia. We are talking about drug development within a university. So the Wellcome Centre is part of the University of Dundee. It's actually situated on the main campus. So it begs the question, is the Wellcome Centre of Anti-Infective Research, is it almost like pharma?
Yes, very much so. I mean, it's industry standard assays and set up. I can't remember what the percentage is now, but I think 60% are probably ex-industry people actually within there. So we have maybe the balance is maybe slightly more in favour of the ex-industry people, but that even if it was it doesn't that doesn't really matter. But yeah, I mean it's we see ourselves very much as a biotech within an academic setting in that regard, and it's important because our downstream partners for going into clinical trials are the pharmaceutical industry, because we can't afford to move molecules right through that regulatory phase into the clinic. So we have to be able to stand up to their checks and their due diligence to be sure that actually we're operating in a manner that's comfortable to them and that they can feel confident in the quality of what we're producing, so that they will actually take these potential new medicines forward from us. So it's so yes, we're very much industry standard.
But we also bring in the sort of academic excellence of things like the fundamental biology, the mode of action group, and we have opportunities because we're based within the university to interact with a whole lot of world-class scientists in basic biology and other aspects. And as Kevin was just mentioning about interacting with physicists, and so we have opportunities to interact with a whole range of different people.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's great to hear. So I think actually that is going to call us on time on this, and I would like to thank both yourselves, so Ian and Kev, for taking part in this In Conversation With. And I'd also like to thank the behind the scenes crew as well for actually putting this event together and shuffling the questions to me, as I'm trying, hopefully I've done your questions justice by asking them to both Ian and Kev. So thank you very much, everybody, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Bye.